That's great. Fabulous. Thank you. This meeting is being recorded. You better believe it. Okay. Parshah Bshaalach, we're getting recorded. It's 8:30 on the button. We're going to get started on time. You better be surprised. Here we go. It is another wonderful Monday evening. And we're going to do our 3-step journey. Welcome aboard, everybody who's here already. And we're going to start off with what's going on the calendar. What's going on the calendar? What's going on in the Parshah? And what's a practical, relevant life message we can glean from Parshah to get us switched on, supercharged, to keep on doing the good things that we're doing and growing and making Geula our reality. Starting off with what's going on in the calendar. We can't miss out the fact that although it's behind us, but just yesterday, Sunday, Yud Aleph Shvat, and Shabbos Yud Shvat, the major special days of the Rebbe taking upon himself to be the Nasi Adar, to take upon himself the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch. And from day one, the Rebbe didn't just see himself as the Rebbe of Lubavitch. The Rebbe saw himself as responsible for all of Yiddishkeit across the board. The Rebbe would actually address his letters to L'chol B'nei Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem across the globe, and much more than that, the Rebbe felt responsible for whatever was going on around the world, Jews and non-Jews equally. Please don't play with that. Thank you. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It was just one of the Fabrengs I was joining. They were discussing the idea of one of the Hasidim who tried to buy for the Rebbe a gift, which was an electric envelope opener. And the fellow figured, it was actually a very dedicated Hasid, that the Rebbe's opening was almost 400 letters a day on average. And that was a quieter day. At times, the USPS, the Postal Service, would come a few times a day. So he figured he would save the Rebbe a bit of time by purchasing an electric envelope opener, which would save the Rebbe maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds per letter, times that by 400, times that by whatever many days a week. And he figured he would save the Rebbe a few moments, which was precious moments. And of course, he tries, the Rebbe didn't use it. The Rebbe wouldn't use it. And eventually he thought maybe because it was making noise, he spent even more money trying to purchase a more expensive one that had a muffler. And the short of the story is, the Rebbe eventually explained, or it was explained to him, the Rebbe didn't want to open up a letter that may have been sealed with tears. The person going through suffering, whoever it may be, wherever they may have sent the letter from. And here, the Rebbe would personally open each letter and daven for everybody who sent a letter. There were times that people, especially in the late years, wrote into the Rebbe that they've written a letter and they haven't had a response. And the Rebbe would say that if you wrote to me a letter, I bring it with me when I go to daven at the oil. And I've certainly davened for you. The fact that I haven't had the time to respond to you, don't be disillusioned. Know that when you ask for a bracha, the bracha is on the list and it's there. And we have to realize that for somebody to do that, for humanity, for people all across the globe, at every walk of life, this is somebody who personally feels and leads like Moshe Rabbeinu in his time, a Raya Mehemna. So it's a big deal. When it comes to Yud Shvat, it's a day where we can stop and think about how relevant it is to our life and how much we can do with the koiches that the Eibusha Betches with gave us a Rebbe. That's this week. But also we have coming up, that's behind us already. We're already charging forward with this. What we have looking forward to, start up with Wednesday night, Thursday, Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, a.k.a. sometimes called Tu B'Shvat. Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat, is originally from the Mishnah, and it's in the Halacha. It's the birthday of the trees in the sense, not that the trees have to wear a crown, have balloons around them, not because the trees have fruit on them, because if you look outside, there ain't no fruit on no trees. It's not the summer, it's not even the spring yet. But deep, deep inside is when the sap starts to rise in the trees, and this is the beginning of the awakening in the trees, and it's relevant for the halachas of maisras, of whether you can take tithing from last year's fruit for the new fruit that will come, and the cutoff time, when the year begins, is on Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat. which becomes a big deal. Not just because you're going to plant trees, and not just because we have another excuse to make a celebration, but because it has tremendous meaning to us human beings who constantly want to grow, and we are compared to trees as human beings. We have this comparison. This comparison talks to us with all the different messages that we take from a tree with strong roots. We need to have strong roots. Branches that branch out and create shade and protection around us. We need to do the same thing. Create fruit. That means continuity, healthy fruit, juicy fruit. That's another thing that we can learn from the tree. The tree's fruits are considered delicacies rather than the basic staples of the human diet. It's not good enough just to tick the box. We need to have a geschmack. Yiddishkeit is joyous. This is the real deal. This is the excitement in life. This is a tree message, not just to have a boring sandwich, but you have a juicy dessert. The enjoyment that comes with Yiddishkeit when it's done properly, and many other such messages. One more that comes to mind at the top of my head is the way the tree is always reaching upwards towards the sunlight. We do the same. Today might be a rainy day, but we reach upwards. We keep on searching because we know the sun's out there. And we reach upwards and we continue growing. And that's what keeps the tree alive. But that's one big deal. Thursday, Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. And then on Shabbos, there's more coming up. This Shabbos is Shabbos Parshas Bshaalach. Shabbos Parshas Bshaalach is another Parsha. Okay, great. Yeah. We'll talk about the Parsha in a minute. But it's also got a bonus name. Shabbos Parshas Bshaalach is also known as Shabbos Shira. Shabbos Shira, the Shabbos of song, because it's in this week's Parsha that we read about. The song that the Yiddish people sang as they came out of the sea, the splitting of the Red Sea. Both the men on their round and the women on their round, as we know traditionally, the women had already prepared. Before they left Egypt, they knew that there would be miracles being performed, and they prepared musical instruments, famously the tambourine. And they walked out of Egypt ready to sing and dance as soon as the miracle stopped playing out, and they knew it would come. This is believers. And it's in the merit of the belief the righteous women, that the Yiddish people were redeemed, and Chazal tell us that the same is true for the future Geula. We will be redeemed in the merit of the faith, the emunah bitach, that especially the Jewish women display, knowing that although it doesn't look like it, we have never been so close to Geula, and although it may look like things are dark, we're actually at the threshold of the full-on Geula Amitzis Vashlema. And it's that faith that brings it on even sooner. The tambourines, the singing of the Shabbos Shira. Equally, there's a minhag amongst many communities to prepare on Shabbos Shira, Shvartzikashi, to prepare a nice kind of food and feed it to the birds. Why do we leave it out before Shabbos for the birds? Because in this week's Seder, we also have the gift that Hashem gave us that the birds saved the day. In the story of when those who tried to instigate trouble against Moshe by making it look like the man fell also on Shabbos, and the birds came and ate it up, and in appreciation, so to speak, what the birds did, the Mikad Hashem Shemayim, before Shabbos, there's a minute to, in a lot of communities, to actually put out food for the birds, and especially nicer food and more delicious food. And even if we don't do it, we mention it. We mention that there's such a minhag because it's important. So we have Shira, song. We have that the nature of the world is supporting Kedushas Hashem, Kiddush Hashem. We have Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, the energy of the rebirth. After a long and cold, dreary winter, we know that the sap will once again rise, and we celebrate the elements of Sada, that we are the comparable to the trees, all the messages. And of course, this is the week of Yud Shvat, so there is a lot. There is a lot to celebrate. It's not always an easy week, especially if you keep up with the news. Sometimes it's hard days, sometimes it's even harder days. But the Abish is telling us, don't slow down. Failure is when we give up. Anything short of that, as long as we keep on kicking the bucket down the road, we keep on making sure that we're not stopping. We're heading in the right direction. This is goodness. This is what it means to be the Abish's people, the Abish's soldiers, Tzivos Hashem, we had in the Maimer, Tzivos Hashem, they're all soldiers of Hashem, but most importantly is the Abish's humans. The humans that Hashem has created is us. And we have to remain and retain our humanity, which means to be Iber Gegeben, committed to Hashem's precious will. So there's a lot going on. And there are good energy packs and boosters. There are things that can fill our mind. There are times that are more prone to giving us koyach, and it's happening here this week. So with that introduction, this is what's going on the calendar. We're going to flip the slide here to Bshaalach. The title of today's class is Become a Jewish Influencer. It took me time to find out there was such a thing called an influencer. I think in modern world, influencer has to do with people who have a lot of followers, not because they all come to their shul, but because they follow them on social media. People have a lot of followers on social media, they become influencers, and part of how they make money is if you become an influencer and they have a lot of people who want to know what you're saying, if you decide to hold a can of Coke, so Coca-Cola will pay you a lot of money to hold the can because everyone who watches you get excited. But maybe there's somebody else who doesn't like Coke and they want to bring out a new type of, handbag. So they're going to pay an influencer to carry the handbag. Of course, they get to keep the handbag as well. But they'll pay the influencer to hold. And the influencer carries a lot of influence on the people who watch. And a lot of brands have contracts with different influencers that they will do all sorts of whatevers with their stuff to help build the brand, which is strange in its own way, and it's a modern day phenomena. But I guess in a way it's the same, and it's been the same for time immemorial, all the way back. Maybe not on the scale that they have today. Maybe they didn't always make as much money as people are willing to pay today. But the concept of one human being using their position or circle of influence to impact fellow human beings around them is a human trait. That's how Hashem designed us. And today we're going to talk about becoming a Jewish influencer. But as we said, we have to start off with what's going on in the Parshah. We'll get to the Shir soon. This week's Parshah is Parshas Bshaalach, still in the very exciting, drama-filled storylines of Bereshis and Shemos. And here in this week's Parshah, we have Vahi Bshaalach Parei Sa'am. The Jewish people are finally leaving Mitzrayim, the end of that sixth Parshah. And at that time, when Paroi sends the Jews out of Egypt, doesn't allow them to go, he sends them out of Egypt. Soon after allowing this, it says here, but as Bshaalach, he sent them out. The Yidden departed from Mitzrayim, and Hashem sets up the Egyptians. It should look like the Jews are lost in the desert. They're heading straight up north to get to Eretz Yisrael. Hashem tells the Israel people, follow my instruction, take a detour, and make it look like you're coming back on yourself as if you're lost in the wilderness, and thereby encouraging the Egyptians to become more chutzpahdik, more brave, and try to chase the Yidden who left Mitzrayim because of 10 miraculous plagues that plagued the entire superpower country of Egypt, and nobody could stop them. And they were predictable. Every time Moses said something was going to happen, they knew it was going to happen. And they'd seen that that's why they let the Jews go, the Hebrews. Yet, all of a sudden, they started getting big ideas. Maybe now we can chase them and we can still bring them back. We'll still outsmart the Hebrews to Chas V'Shalom. And that's part of the plan. And Paro is thinking, should I not? Chazak Hashem is like Paro. And Paro makes a decision, and he starts encouraging all his followers, all his riders and his chariot drivers and his officers. Let's go get him. How can we have let go our workforce? No, they've also taken our riches and they're not coming back. Come, let's go get him. And they chase up the Yidden. And as we know, the story goes right out there, just as they're coming up to the Yam Suf where Hashem has positioned them. On either side is the wilderness without the direction of the clouds. They ain't going nowhere. Ahead of them is the sea, and behind them, the Egyptians are closing in, trapping them between a rock and a hard place. However, we know that they are headed towards Har Sinai. And Hashem says it's this way forward. This way forward GPS, so you got this one wrong. Maybe your map's not been updated. There's a sea, there's a waterbed here. No, this way forward. And that's exactly where the Yiddish people go, straight through the water, or at least round through the water, and the sea splits. Miraculously, the Yidden go through, and as they come out the other side, or the same side, the water collapses on the chasing, pursuing Egyptians, catching all the Egyptians inside the water, just as the last Yid steps out the other side. And here, the Egyptians drown in the water in front of the eyes of the Yidden. This was an important step for the Yiddish people to break free, because just to put ourselves into their shoes for a moment, if all they had ever known, you're talking about the grandchildren of slaves, the children of slaves, slaves themselves, they're the widest, the most imaginative thing they could imagine was that the taskmasters would be a bit easier with them. But to be a free people, and that tomorrow morning no one's going to whip them for not doing whatever the taskmaster decided they have to do, and they're no longer in servitude to the Egyptian superpower. It was mind-twisting. And part of the process of breaking free mentally and emotionally was this experience of witnessing personally, each one of them, seeing the Egyptian taskmasters drowning in the water. And it slowly started sinking into their head that we are not anymore the slaves of the Mitzrayim. Because the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, are drowning. And we are here on the other side. And it was with this realization that the Yiddish people started singing Shira. And of course, they weren't just singing, thank you, Hashem, for saving our lives. I'm sure they had that in mind as well. But thank you, Hashem, for bringing us through this experience, that we can realize that actually we have a mission to live. And it's much more than going with the flow. Even if the flow is going in a good direction, we are no longer just schleppers who are going to be schlepped along by somebody else. Sing Shira, women sing Shira, it's fantastic. Eventually it's time to leave. And by the way, the Torah tells us the Pisas Hayam, the Yiddish people collected riches at the bank of the Red Sea, even more than they left Mitzrayim with. And the Yiddish people leave laden on with full of Chol Tuv Mitzrayim. And as they start traveling, they're in the wilderness. And one of the things you don't get in the wilderness is Tesco or Kosher Savers or any other sort of food shops. And the Yiddish people get hungry and get thirsty. And each time they turn to Moshe, and unfortunately, not every time it was very politely. And they start moaning that we need to have supplies, rations. How's this going to work? And eventually Moshe has to, at one point, sweeten the water pool that was there, that was bitter in Marah. And then later, he does the miracle of creating the well of Miriam, which was a miracle well that traveled with them. And at the beginning, at this stage of the story, Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded by Hashem to take the staff in his hand and hit the rock so that it should come by water. And it works, and he does what he's told, not to be mixed up with the story at the end of the 40 years, where he was told to talk to the rock. But at this point, Moshe Rabbeinu brings forth water from a rock. Water is pouring out miracles. And if that's not enough, the miracles of the man is in this week's Parshah also. We need food, and food rains down from heaven. It brings down every morning man from heaven. Equally, they have to know that when they go to sleep, they have to have faith that tomorrow there'll be more man from heaven. You don't store any backup emergency rations because it's not allowed. We have to practice having faith. It's not easy, but this is exactly what Hashem wants from us, and this is what we do. And we learn and train ourselves to have faith. V'ya'ancha v'ya'rivecha. Hashem strained us or pained us, and he made us hungry. We went to sleep with no food in the pantry. And that itself brings hunger. When a person feels like, I have no food in the closet for tomorrow, and the only thing I have is faith. And slowly we built it up. We learned to believe that Hashem provides for everyone, everything. It was interesting. Just last night, I was having a discussion with somebody about whether we must go to work. Do we have to go to work? And of course, the answer is yes. It's in the Ten Commandments. We should work for 6 days, and the seventh day we shall rest. So then we said, hold on 1 second, we have to go to work. What happens if I go to work and I'm not getting paid? Is there a mitzvah to earn money? Is there a mitzvah to make sure that the work I'm doing, I'm becoming rich, I'm making a lot of money? And of course, the answer is there's no mitzvah to become rich. There's no mitzvah to make sure that you're earning money. It's a mitzvah to be productive. The Shabbos Yitzhara, whether it's a direct mitzvah, it's an implication of a mitzvah. But the idea of where a person goes out and is productive and does their bit to create results, it's not the human job. To put in the effort towards creating results, oh yes. But the results aren't always in our hands. Oftentimes, they're outside of our hands. And the man is the training for us to know that we must do our part. And sometimes what was our part yesterday is different from what's our part today. What my part is different than somebody else's part is. And the man is the training to tell us we have to do what we need to do. And the rest is the gym of emunah. You go to the gym to make strong muscles, a healthy body. There's a different gym that you go to strengthen a healthy emunah system. And it's called the gym of life, where there is always an opportunity, certainly in Galus, there's always an opportunity to exercise and strengthen the emunah muscle. Because it's so easy, it's so much easier to not have emunah than it is to have emunah. It's just lazier. And the trick is that the emunah gym is all around us every day. So when we have challenging situations, if we could somehow reframe it as an emunah exercise opportunity, that's exactly what it is. And the Rebbe will tell us that's the only reason why it happened. It's an opportunity. What we're going to do with it? We're going to try and use out each opportunity. Hashem should give us good opportunities. The Tzorah of the Parsha continues. This is the month that we spoke about by the birds. And after the month started falling, you would imagine that the people were so convinced that there's nothing but Hashem. It was in front of their eyes. It would have been easy. But of course not. Hashem sets them up then as well. And there were Yidden who tried to use out the halacha of having only man 6 days a week. And the seventh day, no man, which means on Friday you get double portions, and Shabbos you get no man. So on Sunday you can't leave over for Monday. On Monday you can't leave over for Tuesday. On Thursday you can't leave over for Friday. But Friday you must leave over for Shabbos. This they try to distort and say, no, it's just a natural phenomenon. There's nothing miraculous about it. And it can't be that it's got to do with a holy day and a regular day. It's all just nature, scientific. And they tried to make it look like there was man coming down on Shabbos as well. And Hashem was very unhappy. They tried to disobey. They tried to go out and gather man on the seventh day. And Hashem helped them. When they went out on the seventh day outside the Tchum, there was none there to be found because the birds had come and eaten it. Same time, the Parshah also tells us that a small jar of man was safeguarded by Aaron, put into a jar and brought later into the Mishkan. And for future generations, it would be a testimony so we should be able to derive koiches, energy from the miracle of the man. The end of the Parsha, after the whole story of the man, when everything was going on, we read about the Mechemes Amalek, that when a few of the people are attacked by Amalek, just to put things into geographical context, the Yiddish people are miles away from where Amalek lives. They're miles away from where Amalek could feel threatened, but Amalek feels threatened by anything that represents good. And Amalek insists on only Mavim and foolish. And they travel for miles to come and attack the Jewish people just because they're Jewish. The original form of anti-Semitism, the original form of anti-Yiddishkeit, of anti-Eibishter, and Moshe Rabbeinu gets a memo from Hashem go back and attack them. Fight the war. Moshe sends out Yeshua with an army, and Moshe stands on top of the hill, and he lifts his hands. And as long as Moshe Rabbeinu's hands are up, the Yiddish people are winning. When Moshe Rabbeinu's hands get tired, Aaron and Hor help him to hold them up, and the Yiddish people manage to overpower the Amalekim, and they win the battle. And that's the end of this week's Parsha, which, as you can see, is a loaded Parsha. Lots of great, phenomenal stories. Each one of them, I can remember doing shiur almost every point in this week's Parsha. But as you can imagine, there's so much to be said and to be learned. But today we're going to focus on the influencer idea. The idea of being an influencer, which isn't going to be from necessarily any particular story as the story, but from one of the details in how the Eibishter describes the last and final story in this week's Parsha, the story of the war against Amalek. Before we go ahead, any questions, comments, or suggestions on the Parsha before we go ahead? Okay, we're jumping into the Parsha itself. The question we have here is, do ordinary individuals have a leadership role to play in addressing the challenges facing Judaism? So now let's just say I wake up in the morning, I go to sleep at night, I have a busy schedule in between. How responsible am I for the big picture of Yiddishkeit? It's not only for the big picture, it's really how responsible am I for things outside of my own circle of influence, or better said, for my own real responsibilities, literal responsibilities. And you can imagine if this is coming from the Rebbe's Sikha, guaranteed without a shadow of a doubt, the answer is going to be absolutely every individual must and absolutely has a role to play. And not just any role, a leadership role in their own way. This is even before you look at the Sikha. You can know the Rebbe believed in every single individual. And certainly when it came to how influencing, everybody is an influencer. And therefore, it's our opportunity and therefore our responsibility to use our circle of influence. But let's make as if we don't know the answer. Let's make as if we don't know where we're going with this. I'm going to ask the question from Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu was the original leader. Moshe Rabbeinu, although he was Moshe Rabbeinu, was a person who worked hard and pushed himself more and more. And what's fascinating is to observe how the Rebbe helps us notice Moshe Rabbeinu's growth and the way we see Moshe Rabbeinu push himself. And we see the before and after, the A to B, where Moshe Rabbeinu pushes himself. And because it's described to us in the Torah, at least we can see it once the Rebbe points it out. But this idea, what we see Moshe Rabbeinu's pushing himself from A to B, it becomes a message to us that we can also do the same. We can also do the same. So, just to share a little anecdote I heard this afternoon, where somebody was saying, if we were influenced by the Rebbe, and we want to take a message from our Moshe Rabbeinu of the current day, if we just think about the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation's schedule, the Rebbe woke up very early. The Rebbe also went to sleep very late. But every moment of the Rebbe's day, the front center question was, how am I going to make this world a better place? And in a way, if I'm taking influence from a Moshe Rabbeinu, this is one of the questions. How can I make this moment count a little bit more? And if I think I've done enough, and therefore I want to take a break, that's part of the influence I can learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. Where can I push this forward? So in this particular text, we're going to read from Moshe, the way Moshe Rabbeinu conducts the war against Amalek in our Parsha. We're going to ask the questions, observe the answers, and using the questions and the answer, we'll be able to dig into finding the faith that Hashem has in us. And part of the faith that Hashem has in us is the faith that we can have back in Him. Let's start off from the beginning. Moshe Rabbeinu is fighting the war against Amalek. Emergency. Sirens are calling. Amalek is attacking. And the pasuk reads, Amalek came and made war with Israel in Rephidim, which was miles away from them, as we said. Moshe says to Yeshua, choose men for us and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will be standing on top of the hill, and the staff of Hashem will be in my hand. Who's leading the battle? Yeshua is going out to war, and Moshe is going up the hill to pray. Yeshua did as Moshe said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moshe, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. And it was that when Moshe raises his hand, Israel prevailed. When he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. Moshe's hands grew heavy, and they took a stone, placed it beneath him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported Moshe's hands, one on this side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the setting of the sun. Ad Boya Shemesh. And Yeshua defeated Amalek and his people by the sword because Moshe's hands were being propped up and held up. Any observations on the psukim that we read here in this quote? Anything jump out or stand out worth noting, or a question you might ask on the verses between Ches and Yud Gimel 8 and 13, the final psukim in our Parshah? Anyone? Any of the psukim stand out? Noteworthy. I mean, all psukim on the Torah, so they're obviously noteworthy. But something that stands out, that's looking for dirshuni or commentary. Let me see. The last one. Which one? They won. We like when the Yiddish people win. Yes, absolutely. Good teams always win. I'm going to point out, you know what, let's do first the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah Rosh Hashanah describes the question, how are Moshe's hands managing the battle? Are Moshe's hands magical switches? Up, win. Down, lose. What's going on? And the Gemara asks, and it says, of course, when it was then Moshe raised his hand and rebelled, does Moshe's hand make the war or break the war? And the quote from the Midrash, Mishnah, what's Moshe's hands? How does it work? Answers the Mishnah. Of course not. Rather, the entire time that the Jewish people gazed upward and bound their hearts to the Father in heaven, the direction that Moshe Rabbeinu was pointing his hands, they prevailed. And when they did not, they failed. So Moshe Rabbeinu's hands is really Moshe Rabbeinu directing the attention and the awareness of his people. And when he points them heavenwards, then they are reaching upwards. And they have the bracha of Hashem. Unfortunately, when Moshe Rabbeinu's hands don't direct us upwards, and we lose that sight, that awareness, Rahman al-Sam, we could lose. And that's why it was really important that Moshe Rabbeinu was up the hill pointing upwards. Says Rashi, how then did Moshe Rabbeinu's hands get heavy? Did Moshe Rabbeinu stop directing us upwards? Says Rashi, although Moshe Rabbeinu is always directing us upwards, in this particular instance, there was a challenge for Moshe to raise the generation upwards the whole time. And it was only with the help and support of his brother and nephew, Aaron and Hur, and Moshe Rabbeinu continued to raise us above the fray of the war so that we won. Says Rashi, Moshe's hands grew heavy because he shirked the mitzvah and appointed another to take his role. His hands became heavy. I ask you the question, did Moshe Rabbeinu make sure that the Jews won the war? Oh yes. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't walk away from the war. And we're going to discuss what it means that Moshe Rabbeinu shirked the mitzvah. But Rashi says he appoints Yeshua to lead the battle, and that itself becomes a challenge for Moshe. And we're going to learn that this is point A. Point A is when Moshe appoints Yeshua to go and lead the battle. And point B is later on, when Moshe personally leads the battle. And that's when Moshe Rabbeinu pushes himself even on his standards, a person can get involved. But let's stay here within our Parsha. We're still in the question time. And we're noticing that number one is to see that Moshe Rabbeinu's hands up and down mean lead the generation closer to Hashem. Number two, Moshe Rabbeinu's hands get heavy, and that's because he hasn't personally led the Jews in battle. Instead, he's somewhat taken a back seat in his leadership role, and therefore his hands got heavy. Says in the Chilta, there'll be Shmuel, Moshe's hands grew heavy. Here we learn that one should never defer a mitzvah. If had Moshe not told Yeshua, choose man for us, instead he would have gone himself, he would not have incurred the suffering. It is said, at that moment, Moshe's hands were as heavy as if 2 jugs of water hung from them. And you get the Kabbalah of why it's jugs and it's water and it's still chesed and it's heavy and it's weight and it needs to be able to be picked up. Moshe Rabbeinu's hands held the people upwards. But as a consequence, for neglecting the front line, Moshe's hands grew extraordinarily heavy. So this is where we start off from. Now, it happens to be that there are actual quotes from Moshe. And Moshe himself teaches us how he sees the role of a leader. Now, I'll be honest, these quotes are from later on in the story of Moshe, and perhaps they're from stage B. That maybe answers the question I'm about to ask. But we're going to see that Moshe Rabbeinu, in his own words, when he says to Hashem, we need a new leader to replace me after I'm gone, the way he describes a leader, let's read it inside. Moshe spoke to Hashem saying, this is way back later in Bamidbar, please Hashem, may God of the spirit of all flesh appoint a man over the congregation. He's praying that Hashem appoint a replacement so that the Jews have a Moshe that will continue after him. Says Moshe, what sort of leader do they need? A man over the congregation who will go out before them, who will come before them, who will take them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of God will not be like a flock that has no shepherd. They need somebody who will lead them in battle, says Rashi. Asher Yetzi Lefeim, who will go out before them, unlike those kings of the nations who sit in their palace and send their soldiers to war. My successor, as Moshe, ought to do as I have done when I fought against Sichon and Og, that he personally led them in battle. So clearly, Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us that a leadership role means you lead from the front, and when it comes to going to war, you don't stay back in the shadows, but the leader leads. And therefore, our question is going to be threefold. Number one is, why in our story does Moshe choose the course of action and not personally lead the army into battle? He decides to go up the hill. What was Moshe thinking, and why did he come to that conclusion? Number two, if Moshe believes so strongly that the leader belongs in the front lines, why isn't he doing what he believes himself? And number three, what message does the Torah seek to communicate by telling us this about Moshe? Why do we need to know that Moshe teaches us one thing, but in the story did the other thing? Now, of course, history is important, but not every bit of history makes it into the Torah. This bit of history does. And it's extremely relevant for us to understand that there was a reasoning that Moshe Rabbeinu had. There was a consequence for that reasoning. And Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us how to push past it. And although we couldn't qualify or validate our position, push past it. And continue to grow more. I'm not saying that it was bad. We're saying we can push further. And here's where we go. We're going to learn. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us how it should look, even if it didn't look this way. So the premise we have to start off with is the Jewish people had many enemies. We could safely say that the Egyptians were one of our very first enemies. Yet when we fought the Egyptians, there was no soldiers. There was no army. Hashem fought the Egyptians. Certainly inside Mitzrayim, in Egypt, with the plagues, the Jews didn't do anything. The plagues came from Hashem. Moshe, one by one, brought on the plagues of Hashem, and they destroyed the Egyptian empire. And then again at the Red Sea, in this week's Parshah, what did the Jews do to the Egyptians? Nothing. Hashem says to them, you just journey on. Va'atem tacharishon, you be quiet, be stum. You don't have to do nisht. I'm taking care of this. But somehow in this week's Parshah, all of a sudden, there's a war. Generally speaking, throughout the entire sojourn of the 40 years, the Jewish people in the desert, they were running on miracles. Not just a little bit, not just a bit of miracles, entirely on miracles. With a few exceptions. And one of those exceptions was the war in our Sedra about Amalek. You have to remember that Moshe Rabbeinu, at this time, when he leads the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, is 80 years old. His brother Aaron is 83 years old. Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron's 83 years old when they spoke to Paro. Why is this relevant information? Because 80 years old, although they're still alive and they're well, is above the age of military. So although you might say a senior military person is better experienced and has better understanding of strategy, of leadership, but by the time you pass the age of 60, halachically, you're no longer in the army. Certainly at the age of 80, you pass military age. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu would safely not be at war at the age of 80, because the rules of the army are that you're in service from 20 up till 60 if you make it. But at 80, Moshe Rabbeinu is not at war. Which brings us to the next question. That we just read a quote of Moshe fighting the war of Sichon and Og 40 years later, and 80 plus 40 equals 120 years old. Moshe Rabbeinu is fighting strong at 120. He's in the army. So why at the age of 80 is he not in the army? Is he up the hill? Why is Moshe Rabbeinu taking a back step at 80 years old? And the answer is going to be because although generally everything was miraculous, this war against Amalek was one of those exceptions. And the reason why Hashem made an exception to not fight the Amalek war by way of miracles is down to the idea of emunah and bitachon. Faith in Hashem. When we have faith in Hashem, we allow ourselves to be worthy receptacles, receivers of Hashem's miracles. It's the faith of the Yid that draws the miracle. But if our faith waves or falters, chas v'shalom, so then our drawing down of the miracle and even the ability to receive the miracle is greatly weakened. This is what happened at the war of Amalek. Let's read it inside. The entire congregation of children that traveled from the wilderness of Zin on their travels, and the word of Hashem, they camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for people to drink in Rephidim. The people quarreled with Moshe and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moshe said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Hashem? Or in simple English, emunah and bitachon. We need more faith. Hashem knows what's going on. Don't quarrel. Don't make it sound like the world's falling apart. You want to daven? Okay, daven. Of course you should daven. But to argue that the world's falling apart, to argue with Hashem, the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moshe and said, why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill me and my children and my livestock with thirst? This isn't davening. This is a lack of faith. This isn't saying, Hashem, I know you're in charge. You can do whatever you want. Please, can we have water? Hashem, you have no clue what you're doing. You're killing us. Why did you even bring us out here? That's not faith. And unfortunately, when there's no faith, that place became known in the name as, he called the place Ma'asa, trial, and Mariva, quarrel, due to the quarrel of the children of Israel, and due to the testing of Hashem saying, is God amongst us or not? The emunah bitachon was lost. And unfortunately, what happens right after that, says the Medrash, is a whole comparison story. Like the father looking after the son, and whatever happened, the father protected the son. And then the son starts saying, oh, where's father? Is father even here? Has anyone seen where my father is? And the father is literally just protecting him. And the net result is, the father says, son, if you don't know where I am, if you're not sure if I'm here with you, I'm going to put you down. And you'll be walking on your own. And if you can't have bitachon and father, Rahman al-San, from all sides, the predators can come, and that's exactly what happens. Amalek comes as a direct consequence of the lack of bitachon. So if we doubt miracles, then unfortunately that doesn't allow, it's not conducive for miracles to happen. So despite experiencing the greatest miracles, the Jewish people still doubted Hashem's presence, and this misplaced doubt created an opening for Amalek to attack them. Guess what? When Amalek attacks, Hashem still loves the Yid, and they're still going to win. But the miracle stories that led the Yidden out of Mitzrayim through the Red Sea were on hold, because the emunah and bitachon was weakened. And here's why Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't lead the battle. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm 80 years old. If we're not going the miracle route, then I don't belong in the army at 80 years old. If we're going by the rules, I can't be in the army. I can daven for you, and I certainly will, but I can't fight the battle if you're playing by the book. And therefore Moshe goes up the mountain and sends Yeshua out. And Yeshua was 57, wherever he was, looking from resources, how old he was. And he led the battle because he was an older, experienced, but within age, combatant. Moshe stays up the mountain. And although Moshe stays up the mountain, he davens for the Yidden. So sensing Nature's doubt of Hashem, Moshe planned for a world without miracles. And sent Yeshua, whose age met the proper criteria for going to war, to lead him instead. What we have here is that Moshe Rabbeinu's hands are steady. His two hands are referred to as one, standing firm in prayer. Moshe Rabbeinu davens to the Yid. Here, by the way, just parenthetically, throw in such a gorgeous note from the Rebbe Sicha, that you can't go the miracle route, so instead you have to go the natural route. And the natural route for a Yid is that when you have a problem, the tzaddik davens and you get a miracle. And that's the natural route, not miraculous route. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu has to, unfortunately, play by nature and only daven for the Yid instead of making it a miraculous victory without a war. And this is Moshe Rabbeinu standing on the hilltop, holding his hands up. What does holding his hands up mean? Uplifting the Yiddish people, rebuilding emunah and bitachon, rebuilding the Yid's faith in Hashem that we know is true. It's just hard for us. It's hard to have the koyach to keep on having that emunah and bitachon front and center. And Moshe Rabbeinu lifts our focus heavenwards. And with this, the Yiddish people win the war over Amalek in the so-called natural way. Why? Because the tzaddik helps us in the straight and narrow, even if we messed it up. Of course, the ideal is to have emunah and bitachon, but we shouldn't need to have the challenges. But if there is a challenge, the tzaddik, the Moshe, goes up the hill and lifts us up upwards. So this is a beautiful understanding about our position, how much we control what goes on around us. Because it's our emunah and bitachon that brings the hatzlacha and the bracha. And if it was easy, it wouldn't be called avodah. If it was just a switch of a button to have absolute faith and certainty, confidence in Hashem's goodness, then it wouldn't be a challenge. But it is a challenge. And when it's a challenge, it's exactly why the bitachon has the power and the potency that's needed. But if we stopped here, we would be left with the alarming question. What did Moshe do that made his hands grow heavy? If Moshe Rabbeinu has to play by nature because the people are playing without emunah and bitachon, so why is Moshe's hands getting heavy? He's doing the best he can. He's uplifting a generation. He's leading us to try and build up our emunah and bitachon from the top of the hill. Why should his hands grow heavy? And the answer the Sikha tells us is that next time around, Moshe is going to push himself further. Moshe experiences heavy hands, gets through this one, but next time, he's not going up the hill. Because Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us an additional level of leadership. And he wants us to know it so that we can do the thing. What's the next level? I'm first going to say it outside, and then if we have time, we'll say it inside. Moshe Rabbeinu knows that when we have confidence in Hashem, we don't have to plan for a battle. He also knows that if our emunah and bitachon isn't so strong, he will daven, he will give us brachas, and he'll help us uplift so that we'll still win the war, and we will still have the upper hand, upper as in Moshe Rabbeinu's hands will be up. However, that calculation that Moshe Rabbeinu made, I'm 80, I can no longer be in the army. Therefore, I'll have to do something else instead. And I'll daven, I'll make the time special. Moshe Rabbeinu says, 1 second. Sometimes you can figure out what's right and what's wrong. Let's just say you have a question of a milk and meat. Can you eat the pot of cholent if by mistake a coffee little drop spilt into the pot of cholent? So you'll go and you'll figure and you'll ask the Rav and you'll know what it is. And that's the halacha. And you know what the halacha is. You take the time to sum it up, to figure out the question, to look up the answer, and you can make the calculation. You know what's right. Great. Maybe it's a business question. You go to your Rav. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do the other? You get the answer. May I purchase such and such a product from such and such a country if they support this, that, and the other, or the money, or the this or that? You ask your Rav, and they'll weigh it up, and they'll come back with a good halachic answer. They'll tell you what Hashem wants from us, and we'll do it. The calculations are correct. However, and this is what we learn. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu learned. And the Torah tells us about it so we can learn. Sometimes there's no time for calculations. There's no time to stop, decide whether, if, do I belong in the front lines? Do I not belong in the front lines? I'm 80 years old. Should I not? What does the book say? I'll have to go up the hill instead. There's no time for that. When? When there's a fight with Amalek. When there's a war going on. And it's the safety of people on the line. Everybody's in it. And the way the Sikha takes it, it's not just because there's a battle and there's people's lives on the line, which of course is the case. If, God forbid, there's an emergency in a shul, who should pick up the phone to call the emergency services? The Rav, the Dayan. It should be clear and obvious that it's not a shlepper who goes to pick up the phone on Shabbos. This is the Eibish's will. That's it's Pekuach Nefesh. It's more than that. When there's an Amalek on the line. And we know Amalek was the symbol of scoffing, of just doing whatever you want just because I want to. And in a way, even if I don't want to, just because it's not what you want. And the way Amalek operates is just by creating doubts. And the arguments make no sense. And the distraction that it generates should never win. But this is Amalek. Distraction. It's all over the place. And it's so difficult to deal with. It's so tempting to fall into the trap. And when that pops its nasty head up, there's no time to start calculating and deciding whether I belong or I don't belong. And therefore Moshe changes. And he says, I should have taken immediate action. When people's lives are at stake, whether it means literally pikuach nefesh, or as we're going to learn, even if it's just the battle of Amalek equals doubt. Those who like gematria, Amalek is actually the same gematria as Safek. What's the gematria of Samach Pei Kuf? 240. Is that right? Samach is 60, Pei is 80, and Kuf is 100. 180 plus 60, 240. It's the same gematria as Amalek, Ayin Mem Lam Kuf, and Amalek is the gematria of Safek, and Safek doesn't need to have an explanation. Anxiety, worry, what if? Maybe, perhaps, but doubt. Amalek is there just to break down the heat and the commitment, the excitement, the passion, the goodness that is being generated. Comes the Amalek and says, well, I'll just make a snide remark. You have it so many times in a classroom. Everyone is focused, and you have one kid who can't be bothered. You know what? Let me just make a little joke. I didn't do anything wrong. I just made a little joke. Amalek right there. Amalek right there. And now everyone's self-conscious or not sure. And this idea, the concept of being indifferent, this is Amalek. And guess what else is gematria of Safek and Amalek? Think of the letters. For 200 is a resh. The letter for 40 is a mem. Mem resh is mar, which is bitter. Because the fight against Amalek could very easily turn bitter. When a person is unsure, meaning I know what I need to do, I know what's right, but I'm unsure, I have doubts. That doubt doesn't allow me to exercise that which is absolutely correct. But what if? I know Hashem is in control, but what if? I know I should be doing this, but maybe not. That but maybe that's rooted only on Amalek needs to have immediate attention. And the attention isn't an answer. The intention is an uplift. Bring me up. And therefore, when it comes to a concept of someone battling the distraction of doubt, everybody helps everybody. Nobody is the leader with a follower. Everybody is a leader in whatever they have. And if Moshe Rabbeinu is 8 years old, and by the rules of the book, shouldn't be in the army on a regular day, when Amalek's knocking on the door, when Amalek's knocking on the door, those calculations go out the window. Those calculations aren't for now. And everybody does what they can. To use a very extreme example, of a very difficult example to mention, but on Simchas Torah this year, when Israeli soldiers from up and down the country, who were maybe out of training, they didn't even have weapons with them. But if there was an Amalek knocking on the door, they knew they were going to do whatever they could. And unfortunately, Amalek's knocking on a door in an emotional attack, certainly a spiritual attack, but attacking the self-worth of every Yid, attacking and questioning and throwing into doubt whether I can ever make a difference. And there are people who are struggling, not because something happened, but because they don't know. They're unsure. Everybody's a leader. If I have a next door neighbor, if I have somebody who I happen to pass by on the street every day at the same time, and you know how it works, we all walk past each other and we say, hi, 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 and we meet, but we don't say a word. And maybe today I'm going to make sure to say something encouraging, because that suffix is so real. The anxiety, the worry, the unsettledness that's all over the place, the Amalek that is roaming around, doesn't allow us to say, well, I'm 80, I'm 60, I'm 40, I'm 10. Everybody steps up And Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Sichon and Oif says, last time I went up the hill and davened and lifted the coin of the nation and we won. This time, my hands are not going to be heavy. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to put it into the Torah, says Hashem, so that everybody should come to Parshas Bshaalach and know that wherever it takes, if I can teach or help or encourage anybody at any level, don't let the hands get heavy. Lift and uplift and continue to uplift. And the most effective way of staying alive, staying relevant, staying full of passion is to continue reaching out, reaching up. And Hashem give us the koyach. We should have what it takes to lift ourselves, those around us. And it should be toiv hanira vanigla, good and revealed goodness for everybody around us. With the Gola mitzvahs, Hashem and taking me out. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Make Shabbos Shira full of song and joy. And Bez Hashem next week, same time, same place. Big bench, everybody. Thank you for joining.